So yeah, well, let's take some questions. You don't have to agree with us. We are open and willing. We have a mic for. All right, so we're just going to send someone around and try to keep it somewhat brief so we can get to everybody. I see a lot of hands.
Yep. All right.
Hello. My name is Sean. I like jokes. Jokes are good. They can. I think jokes are very important in today's society because they fulfill a very important role, which is to add humor to a situation.
Are you the guy that stole my notebook?
What?
Are you the guy that stole my notebook?
Yeah, so, I don't know. I mean, yeah, maybe. Wait, what car was it? What make, model, BMW? You look like a BMW guy? Anyways, I digress.
I'm not as rich as this guy.
Yeah, so my question is, critical thought is something that is severely lacking in a lot of higher education, and I think that context is especially important in comedy because it's the difference between getting somebody to laugh and getting your offices shot up by extremists in Paris. So, there's a pretty big motivation to get your point across. So, my question is, if we fix critical thinking, will we also fix comedy?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked that because, I did stand-up for 12 years in New York. And I lived that life, and I had the ups and downs of it, and I wanted out. I got to get, the whole thing with stand-up is most comics, you do it for a while, and then you get out. You get a sitcom, or you get a talk show, or you get a game show, or whatever it is, and you get out, and you go do something else. And I got out. I do this, which is great. But the last couple of years, the left has become so endlessly, horrifically hysterical. Think about, to me, George Carlin is the greatest comic of all time. And yeah. One of the best nights of my life, this is just a little sidebar, I'm friends with Kelly Carlin, his daughter, who's been on the show a couple times. And right when I moved to LA, she had us to her house, and she let me go in a room that was basically George's room when he stayed there. And it had all of his jokes in little laminated or little plastic bags. And on the front was the setup, on the back was the punchline. And I was there with another comic, and for hours, we just read through all of them. And I was crying in tears of happiness and joy and the whole thing. But what I would say is, what would George Carlin be doing right now? He'd be beating them with comedy. Oh, yeah. He would be beating them with comedy. But look what leftism has brought out of comedy about Amy Schumer and Sarah Silverman and Patton Oswalt and the rest of these guys. It's like Judd Apatow. Some of these guys I like and sort of know. And it's like they've become these hysterical children. And you're supposed to win with comedy. So they dragged me back into stand-up. I did my first hour at a club a week ago. I got a standing ovation, sold out, and I think you've seen a little bit of it here. I think I was all right. And I want to save it. I want to save something that I love because the best way to tell people the truth is to be funny. What's that Oscar Wilde quote? It's not, if you want to tell people the truth, you better be funny or they'll kill you. So, yeah. So I'll be at the DC Improv on June 3rd and the Tempe Improv on June 7th.
Sometimes you're funny and they kill you anyway, which is a reference to Paris. They were funny, and they got killed in spite of that. It wasn't their wrong context. It was somebody evil killing them.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Manny, and my question is more towards to Yaron Brooks. Now, Stephen Hawking said something about robots taking over the world and ruling or whatever at some time in the future.
Yeah.
Now, I have a friend that says that robots will take every job that there is. They'll be able to fix themselves, program themselves, and so forth, eliminating all need. And he thinks that will create a socialist society. Now, I told him that I believe that there is always a market for something. And with that, if you can elaborate on that.
The problem is I'm not a science fiction writer. So I can't tell you what the future is going to look like, and neither can any of you, right? We can speculate about all kinds of things, but let me put it this way. I think it's flawed to think in some distant future about robots over here and human beings over here. I think that's a wrong model to think about them. I think what you're going to see is a combination. I think we'll be planting chips inside our brains, and we'll have robotic arms, and I just don't think that you're going to see this duality. We, as human beings, have certain skills that I don't think you can mimic in 0 1s. It has to do with the fact that we're alive and we're conscious and we have free will. Robots can compute faster and do certain skill things differently, and we will form some kind of symbiotic relationship. What that looks like, I don't know. But To be pessimistic about it is to believe that we can't cope because robots are small. It's just, I think, silly and futile and not consistent with the history of the human race. I'm an optimist about human beings. I think we will survive and thrive with robots, and we will find things that only human beings can do and will do that we can't imagine today. I mean, when I look at the number of things today that people do that 20 years ago almost nobody did. Nobody 20 years ago predicted this. The idea that I could predict what people are going to do 20 years from now, I'm not that pretentious. What's that?
The market.
Yeah, the market sorts these things out, but it's not the market. The market is an abstraction. It's human beings sort this out. They figure it out. They find solutions. And human needs are infinite, right? Human needs are infinite. When I was poor, I thought, one day I'll make $50,000 and I won't need anything more, right? And then I got a 50 and it was 150, and then from 150. And there's always more that you want. And take somebody like Jeff Bezos, right? He has $100 billion. $100 billion. You think, what can he do with $100 billion? I mean, he's got more money than anybody could do anything with. Well, this is what he wants to do with $100 billion. He wants to build rocket ships to go to Mars. And that's what he's putting his money in. Now, if he had $10 billion, he couldn't build rocket ships to go to Mars. But with $100 billion, he can. Now, a lot of people on the left says, ooh, $100 billion, we could find more optimal socially things to do with the $100 billion. How do you know if he actually gets us to Mars? That might turn out to be the most important thing you could do with $100 billion, right? So, yes, it's the market, but it's individuals doing interesting things with their lives that is what the market really is.
So there always is a market for something.
Something, yes.
All that said, if a big muscular guy comes to you one day and says he's come from the future and he needs you to help find John Connor, you stick with that guy.
You stick with that guy. And he will return.
Okay.
Evening, gentlemen. My name is John Nava. My question is to you, Mr. Brooks. You made a statement regarding just criticizing history and calling it like a hysteria, and how there's just a concern of how history's been kind of looked at, right?
Yeah.
And my question is regarding is it reasonable to criticize the history that has kind of taken place in our country, and thinking about how back in the 1920s how the economy had a laissez-faire policy during with a Republican administration, and it kind of led to the Great Depression, the near collapse of the stock market. And then, of course, obviously, some people will refer to talking about the Great Recession that took place, building up to, under a Republican administration as well. So, is it reasonable to kind of doubt how history's kind of been discussed, and trying to think about how we think about establishing free markets, and trying to really, not only defend it, but also being able to try to kind of, understand the reasonable doubts that people might have about laissez-faire?
Yeah. Yes, so absolutely we should understand the reasonable doubts that people have. But the reason people have reasonable doubts about capitalism is because they've been taught false history. Now, let me first say I'm not a Republican, so saying Republicans led to something doesn't shock me at all. There's something bad, doesn't shock me at all. But to say that we had laissez-faire in the 20s and that caused the Great Depression is just economic ignorance. It's just historical ignorance. It's just not true. And there's almost no economist today who would stand by that argument. The problem is the historians don't read economics. They teach the same Marxist history that they've always been taught. And even though economics now understands what happened during the Great Depression, the historians don't know. So for example, laissez-faire doesn't include a Federal Reserve. True laissez-faire doesn't have a Federal Reserve in it. The Federal Reserve turns out to be the #1 player in causing the Great Recession, and the Great Depression, both. But certainly the Great Depression. We have abundance of evidence. Milton Friedman and I forget her first name, Schwartz, have this big history of the monetary history of the United States. And they in great detail describe what the Federal Reserve did. And there's certain people who think that they're wrong, but all the people who think that they're wrong because they didn't blame the Fed enough. I don't know anybody who thinks they're wrong because they think that the Fed didn't cause the Great Depression. It's pretty much understood today that what was happening was a stock market correction, and a recession turned into a Great Depression because of mismanagement by the Federal Reserve, and then Hoover being a utter complete imbecile and a Republican nonetheless, right? Just like George W. Bush was a complete imbecile when the Great Recession happened, doing basically the same kind of things and causing it to get much worse, much, much worse. And then FDR basically spending 12 years making it even worse, right? Not allowing the economy to actually recover. Now, that is economic fact. It needs to get into the history books. Now, we can talk about the Great Recession. We don't have time right now. But it's the same story. We need to get our facts right. And to me, the greatest tragedy in terms of history, and I'll just end with this, is not the Great Depression. The greatest tragedy is, in my view, the most interesting and important period in human history from a material well-being perspective is the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution. This is the period when we went from basically being poor and dying at 39, like this guy's, on the cusp.
I made it. I made it.
I'm dead. I'm gone. I'm gone. And most of you, some of you are dead, and most of you are middle age already, even the students among you. Right? 39. And we're making, all of us are making $2 a day. We owe $2 in today's dollars, $2 a day. And then, 100 years later, the population of Europe is tripled. We're living to be 60, and we're making like 20 times more money. And something happened, and all you guys learn in history about that amazing period is child labor. By the way, what did children do before the Industrial Revolution? They worked on farms. So child labor has always been, the only thing that has ever eliminated child labor is capitalism. Nobody teaches that, right? We learn about slavery. Interesting, because all of human history had slavery until capitalism. And then during capitalism, slavery is eliminated. Do you think that's an accident? No, not if you study the history properly. You realize that that's not an accident. Then you learn about pollution. You learn about all these horrible things, bad stuff. And you don't hear the good stuff. But from a material perspective, there's no more important an era for us to understand than that period in Western history. And yet it's not taught. It's more important than the ancient history, and everything else in history that you study is of zero importance relative to that period of time. What caused it? And studying the Enlightenment as the cause of it. That's what history should be teaching you. That should be the crux. You study all the rest as well, but that's important.
Hi, I'm Dragan. Yeah. I have a question. I'm totally not informed about your work. Honestly, I don't care. And, but the question, how can you explain, for instance, Swedish socialism or China success? They have not a free market, but they are becoming the first economy of the world.
Can I explain?
Yeah.
Happy to. I get this question in everything, so I've got the answer down. Sweden's an amazing story because you can learn everything you need to know about economics by studying Sweden. In 1870, Sweden was the poorest country in Europe. It was feudal, it was poor, it was awful. That's why we got the large Swedish immigrations into the United States in the late 19th century, because of how poor they were. In 1870s, Sweden instituted some of the most free market policies in the entire world. From 1870 until 1950, Sweden was more free economically than the United States of America. It had better protection of property rights. It had the rule of law. It had basically almost no taxes. It was capitalist heaven from 1870 until sometime in the 1950s. And during that period, Sweden became the richest country in all of Europe. On a per capita basis, it was the richest country in all of Europe. In the late 1950s, Sweden decided to turn to socialism. And they decided to basically start redistributing all this wealth. At the time, they had something like, and again, the numbers might be wrong, but it's in the ballpark. They had something like 4 out of the top largest businesses in Europe were based in Sweden. They were the richest country in Sweden. They were in Europe. From in 1960, they started the experiment with socialism. That experiment lasted until 1994. During that experiment, they basically started raise taxes dramatically, increased regulations. They destroyed the business world. So in 1979, anybody know what the largest money maker in Sweden was? What was the largest business that made money in Sweden? Somebody who hasn't heard my talk. Chocolate, no, not chocolate. ABBA. You remember ABBA? ABBA, the rock group. That was the largest business in Sweden in 1979. The second largest business in Sweden in 1979 was Yaron Brook, the tennis player, who then moved to, I think, Luxembourg or Monaco in order to stop paying the exorbitant amount of taxes. He was paying like 70-80% taxes on his wealth. Sweden was a basket case economically. It dropped from #1 richest country in Europe to something like number 14. It was one of the poorest countries in Western Europe. In 1994, nobody remembers this, but it's just when you were in college.
It was a good year.
In 1994, Sweden basically went bankrupt. It was Greece of today. It couldn't pay its debts. From 1994 until today, Sweden has systematically reduced regulations, reduced taxes, reduced redistribution. It has a school vouchers program. Parents in Sweden can send their kid to any school they want. Not like in America, where the government tells you exactly what school. They have now a rise in private schools in Sweden as a consequence of this. Sweden is nothing like socialism. If you go to Sweden, there's no socialism there. They regulate less than in America. If you think America's socialist, then Sweden is socialist too. But America and Sweden are basically two mixed economies. Sweden redistributes more than we do, but regulates less. We regulate more, but we distribute less. They're both statist, interventionist economy. By the way, if Sweden was a state of the United States, a state, how rich do you think it would be? The richest state, I think, is Maryland or something like that, and the poorest state is Mississippi. Where do you think it would rank? Mississippi. Closer to Mississippi than Maryland. It would rank around 40, the 40th richest state. Not particularly rich. So I don't know why people make a big deal of Sweden. I've been to Sweden many times. You know, the tall blondes, I mean, that's cool, I guess. But there's a lot of, right now they've got huge problems. There's a lot of crime in Sweden because they've been lousy, really lousy at assimilation. So they have not assimilated the Muslims that have moved there. So the Muslims, there's a huge crime problem in Sweden right now. If you had elections tomorrow in Sweden, the populist, right-wing populist party would be the largest political party in Sweden. Sweden is far from Bernie Sanders' utopian imagination. So that's Sweden.
Let's hold China just so we can get to some other questions.
Yeah, so if somebody wants China, I can do China.
If someone else asks it, I guess we'll do it. But, you know, really quick on the Sweden part, to show you that something strange is happening there, our 5 most viewed countries. Sweden, think how absurdly tiny Sweden is. United States is 1, UK is 2, Canada, Australia, and Sweden. So that tells you that something related to the starvation of ideas and a desperation for new ideas is happening in Sweden.
Ayn Rand is massively popular in Scandinavia. Massively popular in Scandinavia. Yep.
Hi, my name is Albert, and I have a question regarding the claim that living for one's own interest and living for one's own happiness. So I guess this problem is for Mr. Brook. So I think morality cannot be separated from biology, and the objective reality of biology is not black and white, unlike the argument that everyone should live for their own self-interest. I think if not for the minority who are willing to sacrifice themselves for the interest of others, maybe the human species wouldn't have continued to this day. And perhaps the optimal evolutionary strategy for us human is that the majority lives for their own self-interest, at least for the most part. But that small minority who have altruism built in their psychology is indispensable for the survival of our own species. So I think I'm borrowing my argument from the selfish gene, and
sure,
would you like
sure.
to
I noticed. So I don't think we are programmed with to be selfish or to be altruistic. I believe strongly in free will. I believe strongly that you shape your own soul and you shape your own identity. Yes, there's certain things that are programmed back there, but they are not ideas. Altruism, selfishness are ideas. You can't have biology program ideas. These are vast abstractions that can only be formed by a conceptual mind that is using reason and that has free will. I don't think reason means anything without free will. Now, I don't buy that you need a minority to sacrifice in order for the majority to live. I don't know any examples of that. Now, I don't consider, now, there might be an issue about what we mean by sacrifice, right? And what we mean by altruism. Altruism means, it's a term coined by Auguste Comte, the 19th century French philosopher. It means living for the sake of others. Other people being the centerpiece of your life. They are your goal, they are the purpose. I think that's evil. I think altruism is evil if that's what it means. Being nice to people, being friendly, trading with people is very self-interested. I would even say that fighting in a war for freedom, for a good life, for being able to live a good life is self-interested. So it's not that I depend on a few soldiers out there fighting for me. No, they're fighting for themselves. They're fighting for their family. And yes, I'm thankful because they're also fighting for me. But it's not that they're sacrificing their lives for me. They are fighting for what they believe are their important values. Freedom. I don't want to live in an unfree society. I'm willing to go to the front in order to do that. So I believe those things are self-interested. So I believe, one, in free will. So I don't believe we're programmed in these things. And two, I don't believe you need somebody to sacrifice in order for others to live. I think, and at the end of the day, I was going to say this in the middle of what you said. I don't care about evolution. In this sense, I don't care what I evolved to be. Right? I don't care what my evolutionary role is. I don't care about, it's like God has a purpose for you. Evolution has I want to live my life. Again, I only have one shot at it. So my perspective is always, what do I want? How do I want to live my life? And then it would be weird for me to say, I want to live my life for myself, but you have to live for the group, or you have to live for me, or something. No, if I think something's right for me, it's universal. It should be right for every individual. So screw the selfish gene. You have free will. You have your own consciousness. Choose what kind of life you want to live. And I think make the most of it. Live the most flourishing life you can live. And that involves other people. Of course it does. You can't live a flourishing life without having other people be part of that life.
Hello, guys.
Hey.
Just real quick for my question. The night before I saw the announcement for this event on Twitter, I had a dream. I met both of you in person at the same place.
Whoa!
I wake up
all right,
and
God
I see
exists.
on Twitter.
Yeah, wow. And you're wearing the Rubin Report Classical
Indeed.
Liberal T-shirt.
Indeed.
This is deep. This is deep.
So I drove 5 hours to ask Dr. Brook this question.
Whoa.
My wife and I are about to have our first child, and we.
Oh no!
Thank you.
Don't you know that if you follow Ayn Rand's ideas, you're not allowed to have children?
Oh, really?
Kidding. Those of you on video.
Oh, God,
today.
yes. Yeah,
Oh, my God. Yeah.
And so one thing that's very important to my wife and I, obviously we're both atheists and thoroughly secular, we want to teach our son virtues.
Yes.
So within the objectivist worldview, within the intellectual dark web space, how do you see the next generation teaching virtues to the next generation that comes after us?
Can I take a 10-second stab first, and then we'll throw it to you?
Absolutely.
I think it's this. I truly think it's this. It's that I've seen, and everywhere that I go, and I keep meeting you guys and talking to you guys, and that there is literally this rebirth of people that care about ideas. And it just doesn't matter. Even if your answer a moment ago didn't fully suffice to the person who asked, somebody in here is gonna go, that kind of worked for me, that kind of worked for me, and that's what we just have to keep fostering. And
Well, and you can go do the research and figure out if I was right or wrong, or whether the history lines up with the way I presented it. Nothing I said is not testable. You should be able to go out there and figure it out. I mean, look, objectivism has a clear set of values and virtues, and the strategies on how to communicate that and how to get your child consistent with that, are going to change from when they're very small to when they're a teenager, and the strategy is going to be different. But the fundamental, I mean, if you had to boil down to Ayn Rand's morality to one word, right, it would be think, right? So if you're going to teach your kid one virtue, it's to think. It's to use your mind. And then everything else flows from that. Why shouldn't you lie? Because lie is falsification of reality, and thinking depends on facts from reality. Why should you treat people with justice? Because that's the rational thing to do. You want to treat them the way they deserve to be treated. That's what justice means, right? And every one of the other virtues is just an extension of that one virtue, which is thinking. So what you want, and you don't want to, but you don't want to teach them as dogma, right? That would be, you want to teach them the value of thinking, that at the end of the day, the way we as human beings survive, the way in which we thrive, the way in which we engage with ideas, and engage with the world, is through our mind, it's through our reason. And if you can teach that, then the other virtues will fall into place, everything else. And then the other one that I think is really important is to teach them to be proud. So the reverse is don't teach guilt, right? Teach them when they achieve something, you know, as parents who say, I'm really proud of you. Well, how about saying you should be really proud of yourself? Because that's what's important. It's not what important what I think of what you're doing. You should. So it's little things like that. On the playground, I mean, this is the joke I always make, but on the playground, don't teach them to share, teach them to trade. And they'll learn a life skill, and you know, and you're pursuing those virtues exactly.
Hi guys, huge fans. I just had, my question is basically, there's a really old economic saying. Basically, it goes, if you owe the bank $100, you have a problem. If you owe the bank $1 million, the bank has a problem. And my question is kind of to both of you, but probably mostly Mr. Brooks here. There is a kind of advantage to having a lot of money other than just simply having a lot of money. And that is either fame, or you have better relationships with banks, you can borrow a lot more money, you have a lot of leverage to invest into other activities. That's like, so for example, I got a mortgage, and in 10 years' time, I might get 5% back in my house, which is maybe a $10,000 profit. But if I was like Bill Gates and I put $1 million house, in 5 years' time, I'll probably pull out $500,000. Basically, how would you fix, or is that even a problem that you see in a society, in a free market society?
Well, I think we probably would both agree that you'd have to let the banks fail, right? I mean, that's part of it too, is that we can't just keep making big problems and then making the problems even bigger. I think that would be one easy way of doing it.
Yeah, I mean, when you said it's a bank's problem, well, it should be the bank's problem. Today it's not. Today it's taxpayers' problem, right? And that's the evil of it. But I don't think at the core of, if I understand your question, I'm not sure I do, but if I understand your question, at the core of it, I don't see the problem. Yes, Bill Gates has it a lot easier. He created a lot of value and got much richer, and part of the benefit of getting rich is that it's easier. Life's easier. He can, I fly in a private jet everywhere I go, and so does Bill Gates. I just share mine with another 300 people. But that's really important to note, because the fact is that we live in a society where we can all fly in private jets all over the world at a pretty cheap price, and it's pretty cool. What Bill Gates, the difference is between us and Bill Gates is it's easier for him. So gaining a lot of money is cool. It makes life easier. It makes life, all of those kind of things easier. But he owned it. So I don't see what there is to fix, right? When I started out, I had nothing, right? And today, life's much easier than it was back then. So what? I worked really hard to get to where I am today. Somebody coming along and saying, oh, no, you have it too easy, Yaron. We wanted you to make it less easy for you so we can give money to make somebody else's life easy. And I go, why? By what right do you decide how I should live my life, and to what right do you take my money and give it to somebody else? That I guess is yeah.
Well, my question was mainly about the other benefits to being rich. So,
the other who is being rich?
I mean,
other benefit.
Going back to Bill Gates, I know he earned his money, and I have no problem with a lot
There are
with
lots
people
of
who earn their
benefits
money.
to being rich.
But so, for instance, if Bill Gates was to make $1 million, he just needs to tweet about a new company that he's invested in, and he'll make $1 million.
Yeah, life is easier in every respect, including making money. But let me also say that in a free market, becoming rich can happen very quickly. Becoming poor can happen very quickly as well. So there was a saying in New York society in the late 19th century, from shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, right? First one made the money, the second one lost it, and the third one was back in short sleeves. Short sleeves was a sign of poverty. But it's more than that. If you look at the social registry of New York City in the 19th century, people were moving in and out, in and out, in and out constantly because people were making money, losing. And that's a dynamic, exciting world to live in. I think we live today in a much more static world. For example, Bill Gates is no longer in business. Imagine if Bill Gates was in business, taking risk with his capital, doing stuff, but he's not, right? He's a good guy now because he's a philanthropist, right? So I think we live in a far less dynamic, far less engaged with people. But look, there are lots of benefits to being rich, so we should all try to be rich. You know, that's part of the motivation.
But also think of the slight disconnect that Bill Gates has from reality, which is he keeps talking about how how people like him should be taxed more. Meanwhile, he got out of business so that he could go into private, philanthropy. So it's like he's doing the right thing with his money while at the same time saying that other people should have the government jump in.
The leftist in you, right? Why is it the right thing with his money? I don't know what the right thing is with his money.
I was giving you his
perspective, yes. No, he wants the government to take his money instead of him. Why? He's doing a pretty good job.
Right, he's doing a pretty
good job. If philanthropy is if helping the poor is your goal, then he's probably doing a better job than the government did. Then why does he? And by the way, anybody who thinks they don't pay enough taxes is free to write a check to the IRS. They do not return them. Yeah. They do not.
Hi, my question is more directed towards Mr. Brooks.
You're killing it tonight.
Killing it.
Jeez.
So we've
ask him a question.
No, he's
please.
good. He's good. Go for it.
I'm
a host. We're good.
So we've been experiencing economic boom or economic growth, but the Fed's monetary policy recommendations as of February were to contract the economy, to implement policy that would end up contracting the economy. I was just curious what you think the consequences of this contraction of a growing economy would be.
So let me first say this. I think anything the Federal Reserve does is by definition and by its nature wrong. There is no right policy because they're a central planner. And central planners can't do their job. It's just impossible because they don't have the data, they don't have the information, and they're not in our heads. They cannot make the value judgments we all have to make in order to make an economy work. How much to save, how much to borrow, which is what would determine interest rates in a free market. So any interest rate that they set is wrong, right? I suspect, and I'm not a professional economist in the sense of looking at the numbers and knowing this, I suspect that the economy right now is not doing as well as the Fed seems to think it is. People I've talked to looking deeply at the numbers, looks like consumer spending, you just saw a shrink the last quarter. I don't think, and they have an inflation target, which is just bizarre to me. They have, we're going to make your money worth less, but we have a target. We know what we're doing, right? But we're going to make your money worth less by 2% every year. But why? So they have this inflation target, and they think it's getting there, and therefore they need to increase interest rates. My suspicion is, and this is me just speculating, so don't invest based on this, is that the Fed is going to, like it always does and always has, overreact. It's going to raise interest rates too much. How much is too much? I don't know. I don't know what the right interest rate is. Only the marketplace knows that. But I suspect they're going to raise interest rates too much. And I would, if I had to predict, say we're going to head into recession early next year or late this year, or probably early next year, because of that. So, but again, the economy is so complex. To try to make those kind of predictions and to try to look at the Fed making those kind of predictions, it's a fool's game.
Hi. My name is Jason. I wanted to talk about the issue of the growing state.
Of?
The state, the government. The growing state. And this comes from an extrapolation from Friedrich Bastiat in the law.
Yeah.
Groups of people lobby the government for things that benefit their group at the expense of other groups. Tariffs are the classic example, but you can think of a bunch. The beneficiary group gets large payouts that it will work hard to preserve, while the costs are small and borne by a diverse and hard to mobilize collective. So the summation of these effects have wind up growing the state. What is the practical solution to this problem?
Well, I don't know what you mean by practical. The solution to the problem.
Something we can do right now, because
nothing.
Yeah,
so nothing, because anything I say is impractical. Because I'd say change the Constitution, that's impractical. So two things you have to do in order to fix that, right? Yeah. There are only, in my view, two things. One is you need a population that stops it, right? And you have to understand what creates this. So the loop is, they lobby, they get more favors. More people then lobby, they get more favors, and the state only grows. The first thing you have to recognize is that the problem is that the state has power over the economy. Once you give the state power over the economy, you will create that cycle, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. The only way to stop it is to eradicate the power of the state over the economy. So what I was going to say was, we need to change the Constitution. How do we change the Constitution? There's a separation of state and church in the Constitution. It's not as strong and explicit as I would like it to be, but it's pretty good. Thomas Jefferson had the right idea. What we need is a much more explicit and stronger separation of state from economics. If you say politicians have no economic role, there's no Department of the Treasury, because, you know, maybe a clerk to figure out the money coming in and the money going out, but that's it, right? They're not manipulating interest rates through the Fed. They're not stimulating the economy. They just don't do economics. They have no position in economics. They just don't do it. Then they have no power over you, so you don't lobby them. My favorite story here, and I'll do this quickly, is Microsoft, because it's online, right? Microsoft in the early 90s paid $0 in lobbying, no office in Washington, D.C., nothing. Congress called them in, just like they did to Zuckerberg recently. And they said, you got to start lobbying. And Orrin Hatch, a Republican, stood up and yelled at them. You've got to have a building in D.C. You've got to have lawyers here. You've got to lobby. In other words, you've got to bribe me, right? They said, after the meeting, they said, we'll leave you alone, you leave us alone. And they went back to Seattle. 6 months later, knock on the door. Justice Department, we're here to sue you for antitrust violations. Why? Because you're giving away something for free, and that's not acceptable. They were giving Internet Explorer away for free. Again, you can check all this up. There's a number of articles describing this whole process. What has Microsoft learned from that experience? Lobby, 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 lobby like crazy. Today, they spend tens of millions of dollars a year in Washington. They have a massive building, beautiful, all glass, equal distance from the White House and from Congress. Right? That's the thing. You've got to make politicians impotent.
This could go to either of you.
So reasonable. They've got their questions
No, I know.
written down.
You guys are
reading them
professionals.
off.
Yeah.
It's great. Yeah.
Do you support the privatization of firefighters, the military, the police, and the law? And if not, why not?
No, I don't. Firefighters I do, but I don't the others. I don't the police, the military, and the judiciary system. Because for a number of reasons. I think anarchy is an unstable equilibrium. It leads to violence, and it legitimizes force, because you're creating a marketplace in force by privatizing it. It legitimizes the dealing of people through force. And I think all that leads to is the guy with the biggest gun taking everything over. But the fundamental reason is that I believe in objective reality, and I believe in objective values, and I believe in objective law. And I don't think you can have different definitions of property rights and different definitions of things. And then how do you come to a conclusion? Whoever has the biggest gun, right? Whoever has the way this needs to be dealt with is through a process of reasoning. We don't have a marketplace in physics. There's no marketplace in physics. We don't decide what the laws of physics are through the market. There's certain things that the market is good for, and there's certain things the market is not good for. The market is inappropriate for law and for violence. Violence and law need a different institution. The institution for discovering physics is science and academia. The institution for figuring out the law and police and all that is government. You don't like the word government, call it something else. I don't care. But as long as we have a monopoly over the use of force and an institution responsible for objective law, law needs to be objective. Now, we can say a lot about this, and the anarcho-capitalists are always there in the audience to go after me. But that's my position, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, all I would add to that is that, I've had a bunch of anarcho-capitalists on the show, and I love the conversation. Watch my interview with Brian Kaplan. I mean, I thought the guy, at the beginning, I was like, wow, this guy's completely bananas. And by the end, I was like, I love this. This is so cool. But I also don't want to end up in Mad Max Beyond the Thunderdome. You know what I mean? Like, I could do elections maybe in a Thunderdome, but not, not the whole thing. But basically, this is also why I would say I'm a classical liberal instead of a libertarian, because a libertarian, I think this is why you would say you're an objectivist and not a libertarian. That a libertarian, once you really understand that line of thinking, yes, you will end up with that exact question. And I would say, as a classical liberal, I do see some role for government, and it is those things that you listed out.
Hey, first I want to say...
That's great.
Hello! Hey! Oh, yeah, we got a game show host. All right.
Dave, you are very good looking in person.
Oh, well, thank you. It's
Want to say that.
a lot of hairspray.
Beyond the compliments, I had a question regarding...
I don't need a question. That's fine. That's fine.
So, I think it's important to understand the foundation of things in order to try to combat them. And I feel like with something like the left and progressivism and all those things, we're not really using the terms of things like critical theory, cultural Marxism, the long march through the institutions, postmodernism, all these things that came from the Frankfurt School, right? Do you think that this is from just a lack of people doing their research and knowledge? Is this something that we should discuss more? Do you think it'll help to open up people's minds to understand that there's a history and people aren't just dyeing their hair green and shouting stupid shit for no reason?
Yeah.
So I think some people are doing that. They are discussing those things. I mean, there's a good book by Stephen Hicks on postmodernism that Jordan Peterson has referenced a number of times and had Stephen on his podcast, I guess, on his show. So I think the ideas of postmodernism are being discussed. And the fact is that in philosophy departments in the world, nobody takes postmodernism seriously because it's being refuted and it's just a silly, the whole Frankfurt School is just an absurdity. It's like the extension of that whole line of German thinkers that I gave, from Kant to Nietzsche, and taking it to the absurd. That's what the Frankfurt School does. But I agree with you in this sense. The battle ultimately is a deeply philosophical battle. And I don't think the postmodernists are worth spending too much time on because I think they're self-imploding. I really don't. I don't think there's no there. I think it really is absurd. But the people who came before them and set the foundation for them, Kant, Hegel, Schopenhauer, Marx, Nietzsche, those people are worth talking about because they are deeper and important and influential, and they've influenced everything. And the real battle is a philosophical battle on those grounds. It's basically Aristotle versus Plato, right? To go really ancient on you. All of history, all of intellectual thought is really a battle between Aristotle and Plato, and that's playing out today. I think we're on the Aristotle side, and the left now is on Plato's side. But those are and some people on the right are on Plato's side, and that's why I don't like left and right. It is a deeply, in that sense, you're absolutely, it's deeply philosophical, and those are the terms that the debate has to engage with. Whether it's this particular school or that particular school, it's got to be, what are the metaphysical and epistemological premises that we need to debate? The nice thing is with the group that has assembled around Dave is you can have those discussions. I haven't done it yet, but I'm sure I could sit down with Jordan Peterson and discuss it. We're not going to agree at the end of the day, but we can have a discussion. The problem we see with so many other people is you can't even talk about them. You can't get to metaphysics because they're using the noise thing.
Yeah, I mean, what I would add to that is, I mean, I've suddenly spent every day of the last 5 years of my life doing this, and I've been surrounded by this incredible group of people who are saying all of those things and calling out cultural Marxism and postmodernism and the Frankfurt School and all that stuff. And as of tomorrow, I'm starting, I'm going on tour with Jordan Peterson, and he is already, we've sold out, I think, 30 cities already in the next 40 days or so. I mean, so it is happening right now, and that's why I believe we're actually starting to win. So I think the only thing that you can do is this, you know what I mean? Come to these events, start, make a YouTube channel, start putting stuff, and I don't want to tell anyone to get on Twitter because that is a shithole. But, you know what I mean? Like, get out there on whatever it is. I always say, for any of you that disagree with everything that we've said up here, if you fight for what you believe in, honestly, and with perseverance and without destroying someone else or stopping them from exercising their free thought and free speech, I will defend you every which way, always. And I know that Yaron will, and I know that everyone else that we've talked about here will. So I think it's happening right now, and just keep sharing those videos and make videos for yourself, and we have an incredible opportunity to change the world, and you have great taste in men.
And true. And just to add to that, because I'm the capitalist, right? Support the people who you think are doing good work, right? The way Dave funds everything that he does is through Patreon, right? And YouTube, but Patreon more than ever. And that's an opportunity for all of you guys. YouTube's basically taking money from me at this point. Yeah. But you guys have an opportunity to invest. I mean, I think you should think of it as an investment in the ideas and the people, in the attitude, in the kind of movement you want. And Patreon has given us, and if it wasn't Patreon, there are other platforms, an opportunity to monetize what is going on. So this event is free, but you can go home and contribute to both of our Patreon accounts, a small amount, and you've invested in a brighter future for you guys, for the world. I think.
And to bring it around, you should do it for yourself.
Yeah,
Don't do it for. I mean, that really is the beauty. And when I do the hangouts that I do on Patreon, and I do these Skype one-on-ones with people, depending on what tier you're at, to me, it's very obvious they're not doing it for me so that I can go do things. They're doing it because they believe in these ideas, and they want these ideas to take root so that the world that they want to live in will actually exist. So that's so consistent with everything else that we've talked about up here. Don't do it for us, and you don't have to join me on Patreon. You can join Yaron or anyone else, but do it for yourself if you think it has value. Don't do it for us.
Yeah, do it for your kids and your future.
This is going to be our last question. I'm very sorry, but we've run out of time.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for coming. I have 2 questions, if that's okay. They're brief.
Well,
the last one's a fun one. It'll
the
be a
last
fun
one?
to
All
end
right,
on.
let's see what we can do.
First one's more serious. In the Supreme Court case of Brandenburg versus Ohio, 1969, the Supreme Court held the position that you cannot suppress free speech unless it will incite imminent lawless action. Do you agree with that position, or do you advocate a different boundary for free speech?
Wow. I can give it to her. I agree. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. You can't directly call for violence. Beyond that, we have slander and libel laws, but beyond that, you can say whatever you want.
Yeah, I mean, you can't incite violence. You can't commit fraud. Fraud is not speech. And you can't shout fire in a crowded theater for a number of different reasons, among them property rights. But yes, I'm not going to say I agree with the Supreme Court ruling just because I'm cautious and I don't know what they wrote exactly. But yeah, anything else that is not, if it doesn't involve action, it's speech, and I'm an absolutist when it comes to speech. So you can deny the Holocaust, you can be a Nazi, you can be a communist, which is the same as being a Nazi. Why is that? They killed more people, just so we're on the record. They killed more people, so this should not be a revelation. They're in the same moral rung in hell, in Dante's hell. They're in exactly the same rung, the Nazis and the commies. They're the same thing. So yes, I mean, as long as it's just speech, then absolutely.
And
all right,
big finish.
Big finish.
What is your opinion about Donald Trump's character, ideology, or lack thereof, and policies?
Oh,
also,
this is why you give people one question. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I thought there was going to be. Yeah, give it to somebody else. I don't want to talk about. This has been too nice of an event for me to talk about Donald Trump.
I would also like to know what you think about the future will and should hold for his presidency.
I mean, I'm really hesitant to end on Trump. Now, I mean, we can do it, but I'd really love to end on something a little more fun or a little. All right, we'll do one more real quick.
After this.
Real quick on Trump, I would say, look, the guy's the president. Basically, everything is still stable and happening, and there's good signs with North Korea. The economy's doing okay, despite what your prediction is for a year from now. I have no sense what his moral character is. I don't know what's going on inside his head, and I'm worried about that, and I was worried about it before the election. But the endless hysteria I view as almost as big of a problem as Trump or whatever my concerns are about Trump. I actually, I had Seb Gorka on the show last week, and he talked about how what Trump wants, and this is a guy who's friends with him, so I don't know if it's just BS or, although it read true to me, is that he wants people to have the same opportunity that he had. I don't know if that's true, and would I prefer he didn't tweet? I guess, but at the same time, somebody needed to destroy the media, and he's doing it. So I'm conflicted about it, and I try to take everything with a grain of salt and pilfer some truth out of the lunacy between his tweets and what the media offers.
So so at the risk of sounding hysterical, I mean, I think Trump is a disaster from beginning to end, an unmitigated disaster, and I am really scared for what this bodes for the future of the country. Not so much because of him, because of what it says about all of us that we voted for him. And yeah, I know the contrast was Hillary Clinton, but he won the Republican primary, and that says a lot. I think it bodes very, very ill. I think he ran a campaign that was driven by emotion and fear and authoritarianism in its in at its core. I think the way people defend him, it bodes of people's willingness to be led by an authoritarian, which scares me. He can do no wrong. I mean, his statement about shooting somebody on Fifth Avenue and still people would vote for him, fearfully, I think that is right. I think people would, and that scares me. So I think he marks a shift among a certain percentage of the electorate. Not everybody voted for him, of course, but a certain percentage of the electorate towards tolerance for authoritarianism, which is really scary to me. I really, I can't think other than tax cuts, which I think are meaningless if you keep spending like drunken. I mean, the way they're spending is unbelievable. This omnibus bill is not like previous omnibus bills. Actually, under Obama, they kept spending under control because Republicans are a good opposition party. They just can't govern. And so this is let everything loose. Right? The Democrats got everything they wanted, and Republicans got to spend on military. Why we need a bigger military right now, I have no idea. When we can't even use the one we have because we tie their hands behind their backs. I can't think of anything. Gorsuch is probably turning out to be better than even I thought he was. So I'll give him that. But no, I'm very negative, and I don't want to disagree with Dave, but North Korea, please. Oh my God! I mean, there've been 4 meetings like this between the South Korean and the North Koreans. They've always promised the same thing. You do not negotiate with evil. You do not meet with them. You do not sit down with them. You do not negotiate with them. You don't compromise with them. Nothing good has ever in all of human history come out of doing that. Why we believe anything this guy says? He's a monster. He kills people without any thinking. He tortures them. He's a brutal. I mean, the idea of calling him a human being, the idea of sitting down in a chair next to him, the idea of shaking his hand is so despicable to me. And that the President of the United States of America would sit down with a creep like this. What did Donald Trump call this guy when he was, in one of his tweets? Whatever he called him, he was right then. The idea that you would switch from calling him that, I mean, this guy is a monster at the level of Hitler. He's not as powerful as Hitler because he doesn't have that kind of power, but he's that kind of personality. You sit down and shake hands with Hitler and negotiate? No, you don't do that. You ignore him. I mean, I'm not going to get into military options with North Korea, but you ignore him. You don't do anything. You don't acknowledge his existence. You call him an evil bastard. That's about as good as it gets. But you can't. So, I am very negative on Trump.
All right, we can't end on Trump. One of these guys has got something good.
Rubin, thank you both for coming to Chicago.
Thank you.
Make sure you duck on your way out. I'm with Windy City Pulse magazine, and we have a lot of young readers that are really on the fence politically. Some of them are even scared to speak up, like closeted, as you said. What would the two of you tell, say, 19-year-old versions of yourself about being objective and, say, like peer pressure and media-induced bombardment that these young people go through today?
Speak up now. It will never get easier. For you guys in college right now where you think you can't speak up because maybe you're for small government, you think someone's going to call you a racist because of that, you think it will never magically get easier. You're not going to get out of college and be 35 and have a family and a mortgage and a car payment, and suddenly you're going to, I'm going to start telling the world what I think. No, it will never work that way. If you don't do it now, do you think it will ever be easier for you or anyone you know or the children that you might bring into this earth or your freaking dog? It will never be easier, even though it seems difficult. Douglas Murray, who I had on, who takes all sorts of unpopular positions, who I think is basically the next Hitchens. I think he's absolutely off the charts spectacular. I asked him about this because he wrote a book called The Strange Death of Europe, talking about radical Islam and immigration, and people say all sorts of awful things about him. And I said, Douglas, what gives you the courage to do this? I mean, why you? Why do you do it? It could be anybody doing this. And he says it in a much nicer British accent, but he said, when you get into the pool, you might find that the water's not that cold. And I think that that's it, that everyone is just afraid of taking the first step. I can say that for myself. I just started saying something, and then people were like, I kind of like that. I watched that video. I'm going to listen to that. And then you suddenly realize that, holy cow, there's other people like you out there, and they've just been waiting. Most people are followers. It's just how it is. And once people start seeing, and this goes back, I'm glad this was the last question, because this goes back to the Kanye thing. I don't know what his politics are, but I know he gave a little oxygen to the things that we've talked about right here. He may not understand any of the economic premises or moral premises or any of those other things, but his premise right now is think. get out there and think now, especially you guys in school right now. Just one other thing briefly, and then I'll throw it to Yaron, is that, you know, I used to get the question, students would ask me at colleges, well, you know, I'm afraid it's going to hurt my grades if I speak up. And about a year ago when I first started getting that, I used to say, you know what, you should probably just get through school. Like, get the grade, don't speak up, so that way you can get into grad school or get the best job you want or whatever. And I completely reversed on this, 180. You must do it now. And if you think your professor is going to give you a worse grade because of it, you know what? I guarantee every single person in this room has a phone in their pocket. And if your professor is going to start, you know, berating you in front of the class because of some belief that you have, get that shit online. And guess what? You will end up on my show. You know what I mean? I mean, that's the truth. That's the truth. Stand up to the mob. Stand up to the mob. That's all you can do, because otherwise the mob will just take you. So you want to just die a slow death as a frog in a pot that's slowly getting warmer? If you want to do it that way, you can. But otherwise, just get out there. I don't think either one of us are magically brave or courageous or anything. And I don't think any of the people that you know, that we're in cahoots with now are. I think for whatever reason, there's something built into us that is absolutely built into you guys. And I hope that would be the only thing that I can offer you on that.
Yeah, I mean, everything Dave just said is brilliant. I mean, absolutely. It's not about courage. It's about living. Nobody has ever lived a good life by just fitting in. If you fit in, you're not going to be an entrepreneur. If you fit in, you're not going to do anything interesting in life. You don't, following the crowd never got anybody anywhere interesting. It got them all boring, nothing, gray. You know, why live? I mean, really, why live? You got, again, I go back to what I started with. You got one shot at this. Live, right? And if you're going to live, then stand up for yourself. Declare what you believe in. Talk, discuss, debate. And at 19, you don't know what you believe in. That's another thing to realize. I was an obnoxious objectivist. There are lots of those. But I was very obnoxious at 19 because I didn't know. I thought I knew. I'd read this book and it, you know. But, you know, so be open-minded. You know, debate, discuss, be exposed to lots of different ideas, experience. Do stuff with your life, right? But again, nothing ever interesting in life happens by following the crowd. You usually fall off a cliff like a lemming. So if you want to live, then live. Embrace life fully. And that means in every aspect, and certainly in your opinions and in expressing them. It's not about courage. It's just about willingness to really be alive.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you end the show. Thanks to Yaron Brook.
Hey, Rubin.
Thanks to you guys for coming out. This guy had a dream about us. He had a dream about us. Thank you guys. We'll stay and take some selfies. Thank you guys for watching on the YouTube. And we'll get some dinner afterwards.
Once again, let's give it up for our speakers tonight. And I want to thank everyone again for coming, and we hope you have a safe drive home.